What up? What up? What up? It's Sunday, so I am live, sticking with my going live every Sunday. If you're tuning into this outside of the live, this is a live broadcast, FYI. So I will put chapters so you could jump right to where I start this, which is actually going to be pretty much right now because uh, I don't have anything else to talk about. So I just wanted to talk about converting a color portrait to a black and white, because I do feel like there's a process to it. And I think that a lot of times people will just convert something to black and white by just removing the saturation. And that's like the worst way to convert a color portrait to a black and white. Well, I'm gonna stick with that. It is the worst way. It's the easiest way, but it's kind of the worst way. So really a black and white image, whether it's a portrait or a landscape or whatever, it really should be intentional. And the reason why that is important is because when you have a black and white, there's no color. So the only thing you have is luminance. That's it. So when you're converting something to black and white, if you don't have contrast and luminance, and for those that don't know what luminance is, that's just brightness, right? Highlights, shadows, midtones. If you don't have contrast and luminance in a black and white, then it's just kind of a muddy gray mess. So when you have an image with color, you have a lot of contrast with the color. So even if you don't have a lot of highlights or you don't have a lot of shadows, there's still that color contrast, so it can still work. When it's a black and white, you don't have that. So for me, if I'm going to convert something to black and white, I generally will know that ahead of time, because if you know you're going to convert something to a black and white, it will, oh, hold up. I don't have my comments up. What's up, Brad? If you know you're going to convert something to a black and white, you will shoot it in a certain way so that you have that luminosity contrast. Okay. So in this video, I just want to show my process of how I convert it and what I feel is the right way to convert it. Now, of course, when I say right way, that's my opinion and it's subjective. Obviously, that goes without saying. But this is how I would do it. So first things first, if you like kind of know that you want to convert something to a black and white, so that way you can shoot it that way. Because after the fact, sometimes you have to push and pull things that maybe you wouldn't have had to have done if you would have known. So if you know you're going to convert something to a black and white, that is a perfect time to use hard lighting, because hard lighting is going to give you that stark contrast between your highlights and your shadows, which is great for converting to black and white. So if you know that you're going to do that and you shoot with hard light, you've already set the canvas very well for a black and white conversion. But if you didn't know, all good. So I have this image right here, and I picked this one because, you know, obviously there's a lot of color back here. You know, the outfit itself, there's not a lot of color. There's really not a lot of color contrast in the subject in general. Black top, black hair, brown skin. So not a whole lot of contrast there, but we've got some color contrast back here. So as you can see in this, the subject still pops because of how colorful the background is. So even though there's not a ton of color detail on the subject, there's a lot of color back here, so she pops. Now let's look at what happens. And I was going to straighten this first, but I won't. I won't cater to my OCD-ness. So if I just do what a lot of people do and just remove the saturation, boom. Okay, now that's very easy. And a lot of people would consider this a black and white. Technically, I wouldn't right off the bat, because in my opinion, a black and white should have true blacks and true whites and then information in between. If it doesn't have that, in my opinion, it's not a true black and white. If you don't have black, you don't have white. How is it a black and white? But you can see when we remove that, the subject doesn't pop the same. Now we have sharpness contrast where, you know, the depth of field, you know, I was shooting at, I believe I was on my 70 to 200. So I was at 2.8. So we have sharpness contrast. So she still pops because the background is out of focus. In terms of color, you know, there's not a lot of contrast. So if I go back to that, she definitely pops a lot more than right there. So this is typically what people would do. They would just remove the saturation and call it a day. Not the right way. That is the wrong way to do it. Fast way, but the wrong way to do it. Now, obviously, I'm using Lightroom. I would imagine that everything that I'm doing in Lightroom, you would be able to do in any other editing software as well. So take that with a grain of salt. So the right way to convert it is to click the black and white tab to where it actually converts. Okay, so now when we first do that, what you're going to see is it's exactly the same. And actually, let me not do that because I have copies down here. So I'm going to keep this one color. And on this first copy, I'm going to just reduce the saturation. And then on this third one, I am going to convert it to black and white. Okay, so now if we look at the two, the one that I just removed the saturation, the one that I converted to black and white, when you look at them this way, they kind of look the same. There is a little bit more brightness here, but for the most part, it's the same. When you first click that black and white thing, it essentially does just remove the saturation. So right there, there's not a big difference. But the reason why you want to do this here is because it gives you the control down here in the color mixer to be able to adjust the luminosity of the color channels. Now, if I were to go back to the one where I just removed this here, notice that we still have the color. Now, obviously, there's not a lot of saturation there. We can still adjust the luminance. Well, actually, it doesn't. So I wasn't sure because I don't use this method. So notice we can't do anything with the luminance. Whereas if I come back to the color, if I was to adjust that luminance, you can see the difference that it does in the image by adjusting the luminance there. But if I've removed the saturation and I come over here and I do the luminance, notice it doesn't do anything at all. So you have no control over adjusting that luminosity in the color channels. But if we go to the one where we converted it to a black and white and we come into the color mixer, I have that ability to do that. So number one, that's the power in converting it via the black and white option versus just removing the saturation. Okay. So before we even get into that, as I mentioned earlier, the mixture too. Okay, yeah, I'm like not doing a good job of keeping up with the comments. I got to make sure I check them down there. So as you can see up here, the profile now is Adobe monochrome, and that's what you're going to have to deal with. You can't, if you just set the color profile to like your camera matching black and white, it kind of functions the same way as just removing the saturation, I believe. Let me double check that because I actually don't know. Okay, so yeah, so you can't do that when you try to do the color matching. So you do have to just stick with the Adobe, which is fine. It really isn't a big deal because we're going to adjust some things anyway, so it's not a big deal. So the first thing that I'm going to do when I convert it, especially if it's an image that I didn't know that I was going to convert up front, I'm going to check my black and white points because as I mentioned earlier, for it to really be a black and white, you need to have true black, you need to have true white. So if you hold the Command key on a Mac or the Alt key on a keyboard and you click these, nope, so I was wrong. The Command, so it'd be Option, Option on a Mac, Control on a keyboard. When you click that and you click the slider, it'll pull this up and you can see where your black point. Now notice as I take that to the left, you're starting to see more black on the screen. And essentially what you're seeing on the screen is 100% black. So essentially there's no detail there. And then the same thing works for the white point. When you start to see the white, that is essentially pure white. So there's no detail there. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I at least have some true black, 100% black. I'm not going to go too far, and I'm going to make sure that I have some white as well. And sometimes, depending upon the image that you have, you get this right here. Now, this isn't the most pleasing thing in the world because she's very overexposed on the face. The background is a little bright. So again, this is where it goes back to knowing up front how you light it. If you light it with contrast, then you're typically going to have this already and you don't have to push it so much, but we can still work with it. So for right now, I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to give myself a little bit more black. And so now we have that. So if we compare that already to the regular, that's the one where we just simply remove the saturation. And then here we are with having the white point and the black point. So once I have that, now I'm going to start to adjust the brightness because it is a little bit too bright. So I can either do that with the highlight tab, or I could do that in the color mixer. I tend to use both. So if I just bring down the highlights, you see it's not doing a whole lot. It's doing a little something. So we can kind of play with that and see where we get. And then the shadow as well. Kind of see what we can get. And then the cool thing is the masking tools in Lightroom are so good these days. And this is typically how I edit. In Lightroom, I almost never edit anything globally. I usually separate the subject and the background and I edit them individually because there's almost nothing that I do where I want it to affect both the subject and the background equally. Maybe towards the end when I'm polishing it up, but definitely in the beginning, I typically am going to edit them different. Like what I want to do for the highlights on the subject is going to be different than what I want to do on the highlights in the background and the shadows and all of that. So I typically edit this way. So we can adjust. And we'll have some more control once I go into the color mixer, but I use this to try to get things back down to a reasonable level so she's not too overexposed, but we do want that luminosity contrast though. So bring those down a little bit. I do the same with separation of subject, but yeah, it really is the way to go because for the most part, you're generally not wanting the same thing to happen to both. Now, before they had the masking tools, I did it that way because it was a pain to edit otherwise. So that was just the way I did it. But now that they have the masking, I started that and didn't look back. And then so let's actually do another one. Let's select the background. Let's just bring that exposure down just a hair. Boom. Okay, so once you've done that, you've kind of done those adjustments. Now we can come in here to this here and we can really start to isolate certain things depending upon the colors that you have. So again, if I were to go with the red, you can see what that's doing to the background. So now I can pull that down a little bit. The orange, so skin tones are typically going to be orange and red, more orange than red. Well, not necessarily, depends on the skin tone, but those are where your skin tones are going to fall. So since we know the subject is a little bright, if I move those oranges down, that's going to obviously affect the subject. As you can see, it's also affecting this over here. It would be nice if this was in the local adjustments, it's not. So they have the point color, which is great, but if you have it converted to black and white, you can't use point color. So hopefully at some point they incorporate this into the local adjustments, because that would definitely be nicer. Than that way I could adjust the subject and not necessarily the background. Yeah, that typically is what I use as well, Brad. It just, well, I kind of went between that and hey, what up, MP? I went between that and the brush. Sometimes I would just painstakingly use the brush and use that to mask. So I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. So you could use these here to kind of fine tune that as well. And so we know we had a lot of magenta because there was a lot of pink tones, so we can kind of adjust that. And I'm not really adjusting this the way that I would normally do it because I can't really talk and truly work at the same time. So interesting enough, I went live last week and I called through that gallery. I ended up doing it all over again because like I said, I can't talk and actually work at the same time. I'm good at multitasking, but talking and working is just not one of those times. I'm just not very good at it. So, so yeah, you can use these to kind of bring the taste. So again, you're always keeping in mind that with black and white, your luminosity is your contrast. So you need to have some sort of contrast to be able to make the subject pop. And you obviously can do that to taste. You can play around with these things here and see, where you have an impact of things. Of course, if you need to, you could just go back to your color image and say, okay, what tones do I have in here? All right, so I can see I have some teal, but we'll call it aqua. So you can see that we can impact that right there and adjust that luminosity. So you really can adjust that to taste. But the most important thing, and that this really is the gist of it, right? So now if we take this one and I go back to the one again where I just removed the saturation, you can see the big difference in the contrast and the luminosity. This was just merely a shift in saturation. And even if I were to bring up the exposure to kind of match where we are on the other one, you still can see that if I go back to that one, there's just a lot more contrast and there's a lot more pop to it. And that's really what you want with a black and white image. You want the highlights and the shadows to be contrasty. It doesn't really make sense to have a black and white image that's just mid-gray and muddy. It just doesn't make sense. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you know you're going to shoot in black and white, you're going to shoot with intention, which that is what I recommend. But obviously sometimes things happen. Sometimes you have to try to save an image, right? If you have an image that doesn't have a lot of color, or if you really messed up on the exposure, which the reason why black and white conversions work so well on ones where you mess up the exposure is because you typically have a lot of highlight and deeper shadows, and that's perfect for black and white. So that's why that tends to work. Let's say that this was, if I go back to this regular one, let's say for whatever reason, and this isn't going to be a good example, but let's just say, I overexposed it and I blew some highlights and I really couldn't make it work. Even if I were to just remove that saturation, it makes it better, because when you have a black and white image, because of the nature of black and white, you can get away with blown highlights and deep shadows on black and white because it creates contrast. So you can get away with it. Whereas when it's a color image, you look at it and it's just like, that's clearly overexposed. But if we just take away that, it's still overexposed, but it doesn't catch your eye as much, because that's just the flexibility that black and white gives. Now, of course, if you simply take this and just add some contrast to it, that's going to work wonders as well. Now, of course, it still obviously is overexposed, and you would want to try to work with that. But the point is, this is why these conversions work so well, because if your exposure is off, you tend to have contrast. If you don't have a lot of color, you can convert it. And typically, if I take an image And I mentioned this last week on the live. If I take an image and there isn't a lot of color, so let's say, for example, we had this image here, and you know what, for the sake of it, let's go in here, let's go background, and then let's remove all of this, right? So let's say that this was what I had right here. You know, there was really not a lot of color. Even though I'm a big fan of melanin skin, I mentioned this last week on the live as well, I would be more prone to convert this to a black and white simply because there's not a lot of color there. So because there's not a lot of color detail, you know, a lot of times I'll just say if there's no color, I might as well convert it to a black and white and really make it pop with black and white versus keeping it color. Obviously, her skin tone is beautiful, so I probably would not be as prone to convert her to a black and white, to be quite honest. But just in general, anytime I have an image where like the color just isn't there, and sometimes, you know, you don't see that on location. So sometimes I don't know that I'm gonna do that because it's like, you know, it looks good on location, but then when I look at it on the computer, I'm just like, yeah. Or, you know, sometimes you have, you know, weird color casting. You know, if you're shooting like events and things like that, sometimes you get weird color casting that is just a pain to try to fix. It almost isn't even worth putting in the effort to try to fix it. So, you know, if I have weird color cast, if there's not a lot of color detail, all of those things, perfect time to convert it to a black and white. But in doing that, really what I want to drive home in this video is that you don't want to just remove the color. You really want to convert it to a black and white with intention. Now, of course, there's also like the presets and, you know, all of the plugins that can convert it to black and white. Those are totally fine. They typically do the same thing that I just showed you. It's just kind of more in a preset form, so it just applies that formula, but it's essentially the same thing. It isn't just removing the color, it's adjusting luminosity to really make those highlights and those shadows pop. So that's really what you want to keep in mind when you do this, and that's really all I wanted to show in this live. So this certainly isn't going to be a long one by any means, because that is about the gist of what I wanted to talk about. I'm not usually a big fan of selective color like this. I know it's for demonstration purposes, but just speaking out loud, to be honest with you, I despise selective color. I have despised selective color for a long time. I used to like selective color when I first got into the game. I honestly, I've not seen very many uses of selective color that I've liked and that I thought was a good image. Obviously, that's a personal opinion, but I am not a fan of selective color as well. And I think the bigger problem with selective color is that people don't compose the image with selective color in mind. And that's kind of like the theme of what, like I keep saying, like when you have an image and then you do something to try to salvage the image, or you do something to try to make the image better after you've already shot it, those are the times where things tend not to work because you didn't really do what you needed to do to really make it work. So like if you know you're going to do selective color, you would compose it in a way and you would have elements in it that made it intentional, and that definitely could work. But like if I just had this image, so if I go, let's see, where is it at? So yeah, if I just go back and I do that right there, obviously there's still a little bit of color right there, but if I just do that right there, that to me, that doesn't work, because what's the point of doing this? You know, it's like, did I do this because when it was color, the entire scene was busy, and so I'm doing selective color to try to make the subject pop? That doesn't work for me. You know, I look at this and I'm just like, it just doesn't work. I just don't like it. So I think selective color, when it does work, it works because people knew that that's what they were going to do, and everything like visually funnels to the selective color, so it all works. Intention is big in photography. When you can tell that there was intention, it works. When it was just kind of like haphazard, not so much. Selective color has its use cases like for makeup, covers, or something artistic. Yeah, and you know, see, again, that makes sense though, right? So if you were doing a campaign and it was lipstick, and so you really wanted, you know, the shade of this lipstick to pop, that would make sense. But there would be intention behind that. You would look at that image and say, yeah, clearly this is a lipstick ad. So it makes sense. They want us to see the color. They want that color to pop. Now, I would still argue that I think that's a lazy way to do it. I think that's a lazy way to do it because we don't live in a black and white world. We aren't black and white in person. So for you to show something that pops because you removed all the other color, well, what's it going to look like in real life? It's not going to look like that in real life. So I tend to still not really care for selective color, but you know, I don't want to go on and on about that. I'll post mine on IG. Yeah, please do. Please do, because it is nice when I see something that I like. It's not often that I see something that I like, but it is nice when I see some. So that is that. And I'm not gonna drag this on because SJ is gonna be going live probably in about a half hour, or maybe after I end this live. So I don't want to hold him up. So I'm just gonna peruse through these comments, make sure I didn't miss anything. That was intentional, mid, on me being black and white in my feed. Although I might stay in black and white indefinitely, just because I'm not an important piece in these lives. It really is what I'm showing on the screen, but I have to have myself visible, or otherwise my audio won't go. Because I actually have to use two computers to do this, because I don't have enough USB ports to make it all work, since my second monitor takes up a port, and then my external drive takes up a port, and then my mic takes up a port. So then I have to run my camera through a second computer, which is why there's two Toglifes over there, because I have to use two computers to make it work. Yeah, I definitely will give honest feedback for sure. Black and white is definitely not us in real life. So yeah, I appreciate you guys tuning in. As I mentioned last week, my plan is to go live every Sunday and just kind of do stuff like this. I kind of just think of it at some point during the course of the week, what I want to go live about. So this is just kind of a way for me to show little nuggets of, you know, because there's a lot of things that that I do when I edit that I would love to share with people, but I never really had a desire to like create production videos to show it, because it's, you know, sometimes it's just kind of simple. It's just easier for me just to go live and show it versus trying to create an actual YouTube video. So yeah, the plan is to go live every Sunday around this time, just to do this here and just to kind of hang out with whoever comes into the room. Doesn't really matter if it's, you know, just me or if it's 10 people. It doesn't matter. I'm still going to do the videos because I'm used to doing videos and talking to myself anyway. That is the nature of doing YouTube videos. We sit in front of a camera and we talk to ourselves. So no biggie on that. I ain't calling through nothing. I don't have anything to call through right now, and that's how I want to keep it. Yeah. Oh, actually, no. Well, no. I got some images I got to edit, so I might this gallery that I pulled this from. I actually got to edit the images from this, which I shot this way back in May, way back in May. And it kind of fell off my radar. It fell off her radar. So she never made her selects. And she just recently made them. So here I am in December editing these images from May. So when I go live next week, I'll probably, well, yeah, it's kind of tough because like I said, I can't talk and actually work at the same time. So I'm not exactly sure what I'll talk about when I go live next week, but that is that. Hopefully you guys have a fantastic week. I will two things that I got to announce this week. So I have a giveaway that I've needed to announce literally for weeks and haven't. So it's associated with the video that I dropped. I don't even know how long ago it was at this point, about color science between Sony, Canon, and Nikon. And so I officially need to announce that that giveaway. There's going to be a brevity backpack. There's going to be a KNF concept CPL filter, a KNF concept ND filter, some pocket lights. It does feel like it was 3 years ago. It does feel like it was that long, because that was forever ago. As a matter of fact, I had somebody DM me and asked about it, because they were just like, when are you going to do the drawing? So I don't want people to think that like that was a ploy to get engagement on the video. I do in fact have this stuff that I need to give away, and I want to do the drawing at some point here soon so I can get it to people before Christmas time. So I'm probably going to have to do the drawing next week, which is totally fine with me because I need to get this stuff out of my house. So if you haven't already entered into that, all you have to do is go to that video. It's a video about color science. Go to that video, and all you have to do is comment which one you prefer, and then comment which one do you think is which. So there's 3: Canon, Nikon, Sony. You just have to put which one you think is which. So those are only 2 things that you have to do to enter. And if you do those things, you'll be entered in. And I'm trying to figure out what I want to do for the people who guess them all correct, because there are some people that have got all 3 of them correct. So I'm going to do a secondary drawing for those folks. I just haven't figured out what that is going to be. It's probably going to be like a $50 gift card or something like that. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm going to do something for them, because I feel like most people have not got it right 100%. I'll tell you that right now. So if you haven't already done it, see if you get it right. Most people have not, and it has been very interesting to see what people have picked. So I will, when I do that drawing, I'll go through all of the stuff, all like percentages of what people said and all those things, and obviously give the right answers and all that. So there's that. And then I'll also be doing an Instagram post announcing who the models are going to be for my imaging photo meetup. I was supposed to have done that last week. Clearly, I have a problem staying on track with what I'm supposed to be doing, but I will be this week as well. So stay tuned for that. Crazy that it's already December 10th. We're a third of the way through December. Christmas is 2 weeks away. Crazy. So that is that. If you follow SJ, tune into him, because he should be going live. Hopefully he's not making me out to be a liar, because he always be talking about he's gonna go live, but he don't be going live. So he should be going live soon, so definitely tune in for that. Your audio dropped, right? Did it? Check. No audio? Huh. Well. Uh well, I was getting ready to end the live anyway. So I'll just hit you with the piece, and I'll catch you on the next one.